third in our lecture series in the UK UA Animation Lab program, project organized with the financial support of the UK UA Creative Partnerships program designed by the British Council and the Ukrainian Institute. I'm Ben Mitchell, I'm the editor-in-chief at Squiggly. I'm very happy to be introducing today's lecture on animation budgets, considerations and practices for TV series and short film budgets, presented by the magnificent Helen Brunsdon. Helen has worked extensively across the animation industry as a consultant, producer, and executive. She's worked with organizations such as CBBC, Creative Skillset, Disney, and Aardman Animations, where she played an important part in developing new projects for broadcast and headed up the short film content, executive producing the BAFTA and multi-award-winning The PEARCE Sisters. In addition to her production work, Helen also works as animation advisor, programmer, events producer, and jury member. And in December 2016, Helen became the director of Animation UK. She left in March 2018 to become the director of the British Animation Awards, all of which and more makes for a veritable fount of information when it comes to today's lecture topic, which will go over putting together a budget document, key production items to consider, as well as costs outside the production, such as admin, marketing, festivals, contingency, and so forth, as well as the difference between short film versus TV series budgets. If you have any questions as we go, pop them in the chat, and we should have time to go through them at the end. But I'm very keen to hear what Helen has to say, so let's hand it over to Helen.
Thank you very much, Ben. Let me just try and share my screen. Has that worked?
It has indeed.
Thank you. And thank you very much for having me. Wow, what an introduction. So I already had, welcome everybody. Nice to be here and maybe to talk about sort of about all the things that I love, which is animation and budgets. So I had a little slide of myself, but I think Ben's already done my intro very, very well. These are the clients that I have worked for. I had just a quick intro, a little bit further back of my background, is that I had a very traditional route up through art, actually through school, and went to college to do a foundation degree and then a degree in animation. So I have come from quite a traditional background in terms of my route into animation, but I guess even at university, I always knew I wanted to be a producer. And I would help produce other people's films, and other people would animate on mine. So quite early on, got used to how animations were put together. At the moment, as Ben's already said, I am the current director of the British Animation Awards, which happen every 2 years. I run a studio called Animation Associates with my partner and collaborator, Andy Wyatt. And also at the moment, I work as a production consultant on the Short Animated Film Fund at the BFI, the British Film Institute. I'm always asked, what do I like to do? And I always say, well, I'm still extremely enthusiastic into the industry that I find myself working in. I'm still extremely passionate about the work that the world produces in animation, and I take great credit in terms of and give much respect for those that get animations funded and greenlit and put on whichever platform they are intended for. So animation is what I know, what I love, and long may that continue. My biggest love, though, is short films and My Dog Called Harry. And for those that don't know, I am based in South Wales, which is about 3 hours west of London. So I'm not in England, I'm in Wales and have to travel up to London like everybody else if I want to do some meetings. But living by the sea, that's why I put that picture in, is very hugely important to me. So I have to live by water. So, and I walk the dog. So today I wanted to show you, or start with the production pipeline or a typical animation pipeline. And I'm not claiming that this is how everybody works, but it's just something to base today's session on. And as you can see, we start at the concept stage and we go through to final delivery. And I know we're talking about budgets, but I wanted to draw your attention to schedules and scheduling, which I'll just run over a little bit. But as you might imagine, we are working left to right. Yes, we start in pre-production, we go into production, we go into post-production. And focusing on the pipeline, I've just drawn out some of the key questions that you may like to consider when you come to budgeting. And, do you already know your workflow and your intended pipeline on the production in which you're working? And I know we always are talking about sort of short films and longer formats and TV series, but it all starts here. So you have to think of all of that. And it's really hard to generalize how everybody works because individuals work very differently sometimes, or studio to studio work very differently to each other. But this is what we're going to concentrate on today. So before budgeting, as I said, we always start with a schedule. And I thought it's worth highlighting. What is a schedule? How would you put one together? No iPhone calendars or the calendars that you get on the phone. No, start with an Excel spreadsheet or however you do it. You have to start sort of like making the mark. And everybody, we go through lots and lots of versions of schedules and budgets. So don't be afraid to just make a start. So what is the schedule? Runs from beginning to end of a production, and it should be. And I always think you have to start backwards with a schedule. Does the film distributor or the broadcaster or the streamer, do they have a window that you must hit? Is there a date in mind? And I always break it down into milestones. So think of pre-production, the writing and design, into the pre-production, into the animation, into the post-production, and then the creation of the multiple deliverables that you might have to do. So you have to be aware that are you ready to go into production, or is there still more development to be done? Is the director ready? Have you got the director? So you just got to keep these things in mind. How many people will it take? Because at the end of the schedule, you just need to know where the departments may overlap, or they might, and how many weeks, months, years it's going to take. So for I always think a typical TV series, for example, if it's, maybe it's 52 7 minutes or 52 11s, it's going to take 18 months to 2 years to produce. And it doesn't mean that everything gets delivered at the end. It might have a roll in and batches of sort of episodes to work through to deliver to. So this also sort of like helps. You've got to keep in mind, when you're scheduling, is keep thinking of what's that going to do to a studio, or where the work is going to be created in terms of overheads and the crew wages. So that for me is I put in that a short film that we recently did at the BFI. So that what looks like what I would deliver outwardly to a stakeholder would be like, oh, this is an 18-month schedule. Yes, this is what it looks like. It's not representing what a production would do on a daily basis or a weekly basis. So just be careful. You can have several different schedules for that. And then I don't know whether this is hard to read, but I wanted to give you a bit of a headache and say this is a schedule for a TV series, which may not you quite see the individual things, but it's basically I wanted you to look at it from left to right and see where the bottlenecks, as we call it, where everything concertinas and everything happens, because you will have those weeks where everything is overlapping, and the poor producers and directors and key HODs will have to be in several places at once. So what we try and do is minimize that. And again, keep thinking of those milestones or key points, where writing starts, where design starts. So you're building up a picture of how it's going to come together. So I always like to think of it as what's the key milestone that we're aiming for. And then when I'm looking at projects, and whether that's from an assessment or what I'm looking to produce or help with, I always try to think of it into scope, ambition, and time. So is the scope of the project doable? Is it doable in the time? And is it doable for the ambition of a project? So everybody can look at a project and go, can we push it further? Is there more to do? Are we using the right workflow or pipeline? Are we using the right technique? Is there more we can put on screen? So it's really important in taking away assessing where your project is at the moment, and have you got enough time to produce it? Is it producible? People always ask, oh, what's an unproducible script? Or, oh, how are we going to do that? And if you can't come up with ways of doing it, then maybe you need to rethink. Or that is great in a producer's eyes to have the challenge of looking at ways that you could bring that vision to life. Back to the pipeline. What I wanted to do with next is to move on to the budgets, and sort of the key questions you should always be asking is, how much will it cost? Maybe on a creative level, you may sort of find that there's a project already out there using a similar technique, or there's a current show that you think, oh wow, I wonder how they did that. Or you could look at the credits and see what the crew level was. Do you know if are you competitive in the field, or would your budget be, or your studio costs and overheads would be so expensive that it's actually not reproducible? Maybe in other ways, is there a way that you can streamline? Is there a way you can look at the studio costs? And really important, is your budget sustainable in terms of giving the best living wage, fair wage to the crew? And what are those current rates? And will people want to work on it for what could be potentially a long period of time? I put in a quick workflow there, again going from top to bottom, because that in effect will be your headlines and your headings for your budget. So a budget, for me, a schedule works left to right. A budget, all the headings come down on the left-hand side, and then you can fill in what is above the line, what is below the line, what are the direct costs, and we can get on to more of that. But maybe some key questions to ask in the pre-production phase, should I say, is are your character designs right for the story? Maybe are they believable, likable, really memorable, relatable? Obviously, I know many of you out there, character design is about story. Stories are about character. So without great character, you don't have a great story. So, and you need great character to design. A good character design for me is one that is right for the story. So I know you would all know what the storyboard is, but that the storyboard for me should be the blueprint of the film, or the blueprint of an episode, or the blueprint of a series, showing a lot of information. It is critical not to underestimate your storyboard phase. And the animatic is also one that I would definitely ask to be put on a budget in terms of a film or a TV series. And with animatics, you have to view them several times. I even turn off the audio once just to see if it's working pictorially and visually. Does it flow? Does it make sense? It has to show a lot of information. Then moving on to the 3 phases, I wanted to, in pre-production, I was going to pick up on the scripting and voice recordings. But again, you can obviously have a think about the design and the asset build of what you would do. But for the script side, I was putting down that you need to ask some good scripting questions when you're coming to budget for that. Are the scripts locked? Because we do like to work off a locked scripts, and you have to be able to assess the scripts in terms of, how many things need to be made, how many characters, how many environments, how many props. This will affect how many departments you will be engaging with. And as we know, we work in animation. We do stop frame, we do 2D, we do 3D, we do mixed, we do anybody does paint on glass, experimental techniques. So you want to push the boundaries in all different ways. So everything needs to come together. Is it all in the script? Is it all readable and doable? And then you start to assess, how people can make, what can they make in one day? And this goes back to your schedule. It's sort of like a stop frame puppet is going to take a lot longer potentially than a 2D character to put together. Do you need studio space in order to write the scripts? Who is going to, how many script writers do you need, or how many do you need? You potentially need a script supervisor. So you need to think about office space, and will they be doing? I know a lot of people do remote working. A lot of productions are remote, and that's absolutely achievable. So how are your scripts written? Are they written in final draft? Are they written in some other format? How are you then looking at those scripts and doing your assets count? Are you doing that? Will that be collected literally pen on paper? Will that be in an Excel spreadsheet? Will it be using some other sort of like software? And then just keep on thinking maybe of your shoot rates and how that is. So I've written down a few little sort of like shoot rates. If you're CG series, how many, will you be producing 5 to 7 seconds a day? If you're stop frame, are you more sort of a couple of seconds a day for each animator? 2D, you can even get away with potentially up to 15 seconds a day. So what is the potential for your film? And again, it's a generalization, but just keep thinking of, it doesn't, regardless of format, this is all that you have to think about for that. And so you start to then build up. If you're doing 52 episodes or something, that adds up to quite a lot of time. So you have to sort of like schedule that. Next up is storyboarding. When you come to storyboarding, you have to already have some design work already done, and it's scale design work to know how that translates to the storyboard. So you have to be able to sort of like be able to draw from model sheets or a design pack for the film, the story, or the series, sorry, and you have to be able to know, what type of camera angles are you aiming for? What type of what's the scale going to be? Will there be a storyboard supervisor? Will you be able to afford one? How does the director like to work? When I work with somebody like the McLeod brothers, they do very, very good thumbnail storyboards, and that in effect becomes the board, and somebody cleans it up. So how will that come to that? How long will the storyboard take? It could take up to 3 weeks for, say, a 7 or 11-minute show. The film might be sort of like longer in terms of you have to go back and refresh. What are the revisions looking like? How many? And I'm not talking about co-production situations, because that might be another lecture sometime. But how will the storyboards be affected with revisions, and subsequently then how will that affect the animatics? How do you lock down what further revisions? How many passes will you do of a storyboard? How many passes will you do of an animatic to the client? And therefore you are then establishing how many days or hours that is required to take. Animatics, I wanted to just talk about, you do need, we keep talking about a locked script, but we do need a locked script. And then an animatic, you could be working, we put down, you could be putting down a temporary voice, you might record them. Again, when I work with the McLeod brothers, they do their own voices as temp tracks, as a guide track, to just sort of lay down the length of a film or an episode. So you might not have committed to who your cast is going to be, and that might require sort of like bigger names that you're still trying to secure. So keep thinking about, and of course, there, if you do add names, that might help at this stage to any sales or any pre-sales that you're out in the market trying to get. So, or that you drop into a sales meeting. So, but you basically have to sort of like, how you read animatics is that you keep coming back with the producer's eye to say, are they working? Are there some characters that you haven't yet accounted for that suddenly appear in animatics, or some locations or some environments that you think, oh, that wasn't mentioned. So we slightly may have some sort of like stories to say on those. But how many characters are in shot at any one time? So you can start to build up what the template of maybe your series might be. So, and as we're animation, is there any talking? Is there dialogue? Is there lip sync? Because that will sort of like you have to sort of like take that into account as well. So, and the word that us producers love, are there any crowds? Are there any crowd scenes that might slow your output? So you might just want to sort of like think about that. But in effect, what the animators are trying to do is to tell you exactly where your camera angles are, who's on screen, what's on screen, where are the characters, where are they going to be, and sort of like if you've got, I know we talk, what will your camera moves be, and does that require to be thinking about it in terms of maybe you have to shoot on ones rather than twos or threes. So that gives you that bit of a background there. Voice recordings, taking on another bit. How to organize? How do you organize voice recordings? Who is going to identify talent that you need? Do you need a casting director? Again, talking, we have to show a lot of script to sort of like win over who might be being approached, or do you hand it to a casting director? So that again has an impact. When you're in voice recordings, who will direct the voices? Who will direct the actors? It could be the director, but it could be somebody else that you bring in if they're not comfortable with doing it. So who will direct them, and how will the actors be briefed? Again, that might add a bit to your budget lines. It's normally the producer that negotiates the fees with the actors, and that's another session as well. But I personally normally try to work in a 1 4-hour session, depending on how much the output is and you always pay episodically potentially for their work. And we do like to do buyouts. So we buy the voice, and we, because then that is cleaner for the paperwork. So now you think you might have to revisit the negotiations if you do ADR work afterwards, that they have to have some additional lines to do, or there's some marketing lines that are needed. Then that can be negotiated as a separate fee, but do allow for it. And it's the same for the scripts when it comes to budgeting, that I always try to have what I would call wastage, a bit of a buffer in the budget. So we overscript in a series potentially if you're allowed to. So say you're doing 52 episodes, you might do springboards, as we call it, or treatments, or maybe 60 or 65 storylines we then make into 52 episodes. So try and in your budget to allow for more than you actually end up doing, because there is always some really difficult episodes, and they get you. So you might have to work on another story, and that's already pre-approved by a broadcaster. So, and it's really worth noting, you need to allow time on your schedules, which you would have done, through to your budgets for the edits of an animatic to then have the real voices on it. So you need to be able to, in stop frame, you would need to have to do dope sheets for the lip sync. So you need to start sort of thinking of allowing the time for that, for the breakdown of the scripts that all the departments will need. So so yeah, that's the voice recordings. And one little point I've got to ask is, everybody forgets that when we're recording voices, I do not know what the word is, but we call it walla. So we do lots of recordings for whether it's grunting or sighing or different voice performances that we come back to. So a character may be picking up a heavy object, and you need some grunting, or you need some and so those all have to be accounted for. But again, as your production crew, maybe it's a coordinator, maybe it's a manager, you're asking them to reread the scripts and pick out what is the line counts in the scripts, and how then that feeds into the voice recording. So we work off line counts. So a certain character might get 30 lines in one episode and only 4 in the next. So it all works out. But then you might ask them to do some extra character work for as I said, performance value. Or you might not have any dialogue whatsoever. You might have a narrator. So, but it's definitely really key for budgets. It's a buyout situation when it comes to negotiation. Design, I just wanted you to think about when it comes to design, think about the sizes of not just characters, but how they fit into the environments, maybe frame space, maybe color palette. How does it link into your animation technique? How many, what's your asset build? Is it really, really high that you have to, is it complex? Is there, it was on a previous slide, but maybe you're looking holistically at a film or a series to think about, is there any VFX? Is there animation effects in terms of, is there any smoke? Is there any water? Is there ice, fireworks, birthday candles, whatever it is, then you need to start sort of like thinking about that as well. And you can't do design without reassessing it. So if you've done an animation test, is it working? Is there something that has to be sort of sort of like retested or rigorously remodeled, or it isn't working because? So again, it's exploring and the testing period to see if everything is working okay. On to the production. All I've done there is effects animation, which I've just talked about in shoot rates, but leaning more into that. So effects animation, we got CG, you got the water. You might have the costumes, the cloth of characters that need to be doing. Do they jump in muddy puddles? So is there mud? Is there, or you might have characters that has some goo or slime that needs to be thrown over them. So, and how many costume changes would your characters need? So you need to be able to do that. How does the effects, keep coming back to your budget, how would this affect your budget? And the size of the team, your schedule, how it all feeds in. A bit about shoot rates again. You don't want to slow down animators, but you obviously want the work to be done extremely well. So it's, you need to be able to factor in, going back to your schedule, are there any holiday periods that your show would take? So would everybody take the same, from stop frame, you would take everybody would take the same 2 weeks off. You would shut the studio down and go off and have a 2-week break, production break. how will that affect if it isn't sort of frame, if it's 2D CG? Do you put the same terms in mind, or do you work differently? So you have to work with the budget but more importantly the schedule, as to know if there's any planned holidays. And I'm not just talking about obviously our public holidays or the public vacations that we all have to take. So Christmas, all the holidays, festive season is always one that we talk about in terms of maybe that's a 2-week break, but to see how that affects. And I'm not, I'm with the schedule. I like to say you take all of that out, really. Take the weekends, as I said, but you have to know how many weeks it is that your schedule is allowing for, and then you try to work it around maybe some dates, going back to if you've already got a date in mind that you are delivering to. So if not, then you need to factor in more build time back into the pre-production, because once we go into the production phase, even into pre-production, once that machine starts up, then you've got to keep feeding the machine. You've got to keep feeding crew. Once crew start, you have to keep feeding them work. Otherwise, it becomes extremely expensive for your budget, but also you'll soon go over budget. If you haven't planned, then, and it isn't all locked, then you will soon go over budget. So it's keep thinking of that. Let's have a look. Oh, look, who'd have thought? It's a repeat of the other things of the pipeline. So moving on to post-production. I always feel sorry for the poor sound designers who seem to get everything. They get told the schedule. Oh, you're gonna have 3 weeks for an episode, and then when it comes down to it, you might be overrunning and they get a week. So try your hardest to allow for this. Is that you have to think of sound design and post-production as you would go and get quotes, and I'll come on to that for the budget as well. So you would already have somebody or facility in mind, and this might be overseas, so it's wherever you like to work, who you like to work with. But you need to have, you keep thinking of, you need to keep hearing things. So you need to get examples of sound or Foley or track lay. I do like to think of this in terms of the animatics, that even at animatic stage, I try and encourage people to put in spot effects of a door closing, or try to lay down as much as you can in the animatic. It might be temporary, it might be a temp track, but it's worth sort of hanging on in there. It is worth exploring, if you don't already, 3 or 4 studios. If you don't have one in mind, then shop around and get some quotes. If you're able to, then you could go and visit them, check them out, see see who their engineers are, see what facilities they have. So we've all worked with some really brilliant sound engineers in our time, and they certainly do make a show. So the big important thing is deliverables, I wanted to point out, and that is that you should always be able to get a deliverable spec from a list of requirements that you are needed to deliver a film or a show to whoever you are delivering to. So get the most up to date, and then that is what you would then base yourself sending to a post house to get a quote for, and they might come back with questions. They should come back with questions to say, oh, and they might say, oh, well, we can actually deliver to the broadcaster for you via their platform. So always get a quote for them, and then you will have those to hand when you're budgeting. The music, so split up music into, you could have a theme tune, or you could have some intro music if it was a film, and you could then, what is that score? More importantly, are there going to be any songs in any of the content that you are producing? If so, then allow for that. Allow how that is budgeted. you budget episodically for music for the score. So and the contract is quite future proof, in that you know how that music is being paid out. So that is really important, and it doesn't have to be the same composer that is doing the theme tune. Again, you might want to shop around and get 3 or 4 to do a speculative test for you in terms of the music, but you might want to shop around. Don't use anything that you haven't paid for, but I do not advocate that. So, but that is worth doing. And now I just, you for me, based on all of that information, you are ready to start filling in a spreadsheet. And my biggest advice to you is to just give it a go. Just start literally with the headings of your pipeline and your workflow, and just start filling it in. But before you do, is there anything that you don't already know? And if you are being asked to put a budget together and you don't know, who would you go and ask? Who would you get advice from that you think, oh, I don't know how to budget that out, and what if I under budget? So always sort of be able to go to somebody and say, I'm putting this budget together, can you help me? So you need to don't go for the cheapest option when it comes to suppliers. Have a think about what the facilities that you might have already seen. As I've mentioned, you might want to go and see them. Now, I don't know in terms of when it comes to crew rates, we obviously in the UK have to think of fringes. So the national insurance or pensions or holiday figures that we have per crew member, that we have as an add-on, as a contractual charge on our budgets. So it's just think of the tax from a tax perspective, is what does that person sitting in a studio or sitting at home have as additional cost to the budget? So not just their wage, but what is that made up of? And do they understand it as much as yourself? I've put in there, so when it comes to studio overheads, you might find that a broadcaster caps this, it won't pay for more than a certain percent. I would say that, I've tried my luck in the past and sort of probably done 10% as I would a contingency, or even gone up to 15%. But this definitely should get you out of trouble to cover hardware, software. How are you technically lined up for your pipeline? The technical pipeline, how is that working? What maintenance does it need? What's the rent if you're renting a studio, or is there any other rent of any other facilities that you need to be looking at? Your admin support, are you part of a larger studio that you are going to get a bill for some admin support? So think about that in terms of studio overheads. Contingencies are really hard. I'll come back to marketing. Contingency is really hard. Ideally 5% at least of your direct costs to cover unexpected overages. There always are some. So if you can get away with 10% of a contingency, you are doing really, really well, but at least 5%. Legals, I always say don't underestimate legals. All of your contracts, all of your, when you're working with a broadcaster, you would get a PSA, a production service agreement, your crew contracts, all of that requires lawyers and legal paperwork. And we all know in a different life, we would all potentially be lawyers for the amount they charge for an hourly rate. So you need to just think about that. If you were looking at a series, I would easily put in, this is pounds sterling, but about £40,000 sterling for legals at least. So we have the UK tax credits, but we would get auditor costs into that and accountancy costs as well. And you would get some legal costs covering tax credits and that. So And that's a good point. Cost of finance. Some broadcasters will not finance our UK tax credit, just so that you know. So it's really interesting to put down there. Insurance, is your production insured? A production, you might have a production package that you need to do, get quotes, and E&O, we call it E&O, errors and admissions, on public liability insurance as well. That is additional costings. So make sure that you are insured. We have all maybe got some sort of like bad news when it comes to insurance, that maybe some hard drives have blown up or sort of had gone on fire, and have you lost some work. So where are you storing your production? Is it off-site? If so, make it off-site as well as on-site backup is really underestimated as well. So, but you could also look at an audit of a fixed fee you could get from some accountants. So you might have, depending on where you are based, you might have some training, contractual charges when it comes to training. In the UK, we have an organisation called Screen Skills, and if we give them a sort of like, I think it's 0.5% of our UK spend, we can access some training, and it's called a training levy. So we might have some trainees on our budget lines that is provided for by an organisation. So maybe think about some training or some trainees on certain budget lines. Marketing, now in today's circumstances, then you might be having a separate budget for some behind the scenes footage that you would like to put out on your socials. So I do encourage that, but you might want to cap that at, sort of like under £10,000 sterling, that you would make a behind the scenes, some little footage to show people and to encourage people. So that is that. Let me just do a time check. And then what I was asked to do was to put if I had any resources to put together, I found a couple of these YouTube videos. Screen Skills is a great website for those looking to get some feedback on the animation industry in the UK, or see how to become a producer. What a producer means to certain people. So and I put on there Ruth Ducker's How to Be a Series Director, which I found was really fascinating again. So, you will do just as I do, just type it into YouTube and something will come up like this. I can send Aaron, who's asked me to do this, as well as Ben, the BFI, the British Film Institute in the UK, do have budget templates. So it's always worth doing a cross-check of your, and I can see it's really bad to look at, but that is something, again, it's just a good test for you to run through the headings and say, oh, I hadn't thought of that, because you might do. So it's worth, I can always put the link in. And then I recommend a few of these films. They're written by some of the same people, but I just to prove I've got it, a copy of it. I can't see it in front of me. So I have got a copy of that book that I recommend. Again, you might just use it as a way of saying that I haven't thought of doing it that way. Oh yeah, no, I remember that film. Oh yeah, is that how they did it? So that could be good. And I will give a name check to the BFI, the British Film Institute, because they have a certification unit in the UK that you can look up co-productions, or could you do a co-production with the UK? So I have that link as well, and you can have a look at the tax credit of how to work with British talent in services and goods, and see if that helps. Ben, I was just going to say thank you, because I think I might be, according to me, I might be okay for time to do the Q&A now, if that's okay. If there is any, there might be no questions whatsoever. Shall I stop sharing? Oh, that's all right. Decrease spending. So I would just look at the thing that costs money is to look at can you decrease the time in terms of the production schedule, but not decrease the number of crew in which it takes to make it. So just try your best to look at that way for a start. So if you're currently coming out with, and there's no right and wrong here, if your schedule is coming out at 200 weeks, then, and that is your version that you keep as that, try and look at ways of, can you look at the output? So yes, in some ways, the shoot rate that we were talking about is, can you do it quicker in a reduced time? But equally, could you have 3 animation teams instead of 2 that you might be considering? What would that look like? And as I said, keep doing different versions of a schedule before you start doing versions of a budget, because then you will do a version of, and keep them all separate versions. So we know that you somewhere have got a version of 88 weeks or 200 weeks. And there's a budget accordingly. So you've got a budget for 200 weeks, you've got a budget for 88 weeks. What have I learned? Where can I see? And then ask somebody's opinion whether that is doable. Because if your output per animator per day is going to be 40 seconds, that isn't achievable. You've got to get to a point where, and they're going to be, more importantly, this is a really good point, they're going to be burnt out. So the same person, same animator is not going to see you through your production because they're going to be too burnt out. So you've got to be realistic. What does a working day look like? What does a working week look like? And therefore start to build it like that. But yes, you could look at then the designs. Are they too complicated? But again, sort of like, it depends on the age group in which your film or your TV series is aimed at. You might have, I once had something come in and it was a preschool show and it had over 300 shots in it for an episode, and you're thinking, wow, that's a lot for that age group, so could it be more like 150, 160 shots per episode? Does that make sense? I'm probably, but again, it's case by case, isn't it? I don't know. Thank you very much for the question, but I don't know what level, what technique we're going for here, but.
By which I think they mean division of labor between like juniors and senior roles.
Yeah, I would always encourage people to, you're only as good as your slowest person, as they always say. But don't underestimate that a senior animator, I'll stick with the animation department for a minute, but I'm talking about other departments as well, you could relate it to. Don't underestimate, you get 2 senior animators in, they are going to, with 2 juniors, they are going to encourage the juniors to work harder, and the juniors are going to, their production level output is going to increase by having the means of that access to those senior animators. you have to set up that conversation with the senior artists that they are there to train the junior animators, but absolutely always try your hardest to get as many seniors in on the budget as you can, because their output is quicker. It makes sense. But we're all about passing on our information in the animation world. So to have some juniors and some mid-junior, mid to senior level, a variation in the team is really, really good. But you will increase your output.
Cool. Something just to flag, I'm getting a couple of messages in that people can't hear me, which isn't too bad because they mainly want to hear you. But just in case I've been turned off, Helen, you can hear me, right?
I can, and I will repeat the question if you want me to next time. So.
Okay.
Ben, I hear you as well, so everything is okay.
Okay. From Natalie Gonchar, how much contingency, days or percentage, should be added to a project schedule for sick leave, holidays, and vacations? Is there a standard or commonly used figure?
For sick leave, holidays, and pension, did you say?
Holidays and vacation.
Oh, vacation. In the UK, for every person that is on a salary, should we say on a production, is allowed to take up to 1.5 days holiday per month, which they might roll into having 5 days off at a certain point. So you just have to zoom out slightly and look at the whole production holistically, as I was trying to say, and that is that you might enforce that everybody takes the holiday at the same time. So you might actually find it's more cost effective to shut the production down for 5 days, let everybody go on holiday, and then come back. But you might be clever and you might want to do that when there is also a public holiday. So we have 8 or 9 bank holidays in the UK. So you might want to do that as part of a week, or shut down at Christmas for 2 weeks. Because the productivity would go down anyway during that period, because people might want to take some time off. So you might find it, and they might be fatigued, but always allow that somebody might be ill for, if you're on a 12-week contract, let's say, or 12-week stint, allow for about 4 days, 5 days of that to be ill, if you can get away with them not being. So what's that? Sort of like say that's sort of like that's a good 20% or something, isn't it? 30%. But we pay in our fringes. Maybe that wasn't clear when I was talking about fringes. So we allow that we pay a contribution to the government in the UK, and that is accounted for. So we put it on about 14% of what we call fringes onto each person on our budgets. So I still work in Movie Magic, or I work in Excel, and that has the fringes built in. So if you do it at a certain percentage as a contractual charge, you can just tick buttons if that helps. If that helps the question.
Another one in from Isabel G. Thank you for sharing your experience, Helen. How do you go about refining and optimizing your workflow over the course of production, when things aren't going exactly to plan or in light of new info?
Thank you, Isabel. You soon know. So we don't have the luxury of testing one episode at a time. We have to do them simultaneously. So, but as producers, you will know a few weeks into production who it might be particular departments that aren't working to the output that you thought they would, to which you would go and have a conversation with them and say, is the output you're doing the more realistic output I should be scheduling to? And you would frantically go back and schedule. or you might meet halfway and sort of say, actually, we need you to do it in this time. Is that possible? Otherwise, they're always going to be behind the schedule. So you just need to go up and be able to talk to departments, or it might be an individual. I'm not, but that is one way of, you have to keep refining. But before you get to that stage, you might have to have tested your pipeline. So it might be that, there's obviously quite a few productions that are using Unreal at the moment for rendering and doing it real time. That has an add-on to the lighting department, I would say. So you have to start thinking about, and this is when you talk to other HODs, or maybe it's a technical TD, a technical director, or technical advisor, technical consultant, that you would say, can you advise me of any pinch points, as I would call them? I don't know whether that's too British to say that, but any moments that you think might cause me trouble down the line. And that's when you have to communicate with people to say, can this work, this pipeline? And then you also know if the writing is a bit behind schedule. And your writing could be behind schedule because your broadcasters aren't giving you enough feedback straight away. They are not. Remember, you will have that relationship with your stakeholders or your funders, or that to say, could you turn around your comments in the 72-hour window, please? They might say, yes, we can do that, and they don't. So how are you going to address that? So you keep having to remind them, you've got till 72 hours to turn around this. But going back to an earlier question, they might be on holiday, your broadcasters. So what you would ask up front to your broadcasters, have you got any planned holidays? Are there any days where it doesn't work for you? Because you can't be expected to send them lots of scripts for comment on a Friday and that they will get it back to you by the following Tuesday. So you have to work through all your worst scenarios, maybe. If that helps, Isabel. I don't know whether it does. I'm just trying to think of different areas, really.
I would say that that's covered quite a few crucial bases there. We have another one in. What is the most expensive and underestimated work?
That's a good question, isn't it? Let me have a look at my my pipeline. The most expensive for me, I mean, you could talk about any department slightly, but for me, it's the development. So before you get green lit, shall I say, you could sink, whether it's individual money or investment money or it's studio money or it's broadcaster money, you could sink close to £50,000 into development of a project. So I would say just be mindful that you potentially don't get that money back, or you could offset it against your budget if you're lucky. So I would cap yourself, limit yourself to how much you're spending on development. Get familiar with how people like to receive pitch ideas or concept ideas, and see if there's any development funding around. That's what I would say. Otherwise, before you get greenlit, you might have spent a lot of money that you can't see coming back to you. So that is something to be. Don't underestimate. I mean, for all the other departments that for voice records, we potentially have fixed rates that we work to, and that is what we call the fairness rule in the UK. And that is so you've got to remember, when it comes to writing or voice recording, the agents of the talent always talk to each other. So you have to be consistent in paying people the same, whether for writing or the voices. So you can be a bit more manageable with that, with your costings. But I've said development, haven't I? Because I think and again, with post-production, you can potentially get quotes. So, but I'm going to say development. So I'm going to stop there now, Ben. I've said development.
Well, before we wrap up, I just have one question of my own, because I know that this is an area that you've been involved with as well when it comes to sort of short films, applying for funding, that sort of thing. And I was wondering, if someone were to apply for film funding, would it work in their favor to actually have a clearly defined budget or a breakdown in place? Like, does that communicate that they're kind of taking it seriously as a project and have done the legwork, or is that less crucial at that stage?
It's a good question. And for those who don't, when you are applying for funding, whether it's for a film or TV series, people like to see a finance plan and a schedule and a budget. At least have that idea in mind. And as producers, if a fund has a certain limit, you would want to apply for the maximum that they are offering, not the minimum, because your budget will always go up. So always have a budget as fixed as you possibly can. When I say fixed, I mean that you might have already got a quote. So you already know. Don't put your finger in the air and say, oh, I think insurance is going to cost me £100 and it's more likely going to cost you £600. So have those ideas in mind, because the funder might not look favourably on you if your budget you've submitted is £50,000 when actually a consultant might look at it and go, this is going to cost £85,000, and the funder, it might put the funder off. So if you can piece together other pieces of finance jigsaw puzzling, as we call it, then that is good. But it has to be secured, or you're in the process of trying to see if it can be secured, those other pieces of finance.
Fantastic. Well, yes, thank you again so much for your insight today. Really enjoyed hearing it, and there's a lot of gratitude in the comments as well, so I think people have really gotten a kick out of this.
Well, good luck to everybody. Good luck to everybody making animations. I would look forward to seeing them. So,
yeah. Well, yes, and thank you to everyone who came today, and to all of the amazing organizers behind these events, and to you, Helen, for this fantastic lecture.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, until the next lecture, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will be signing off for now. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Ben.